I was paid to forget what I saw at Diddy's event, and it still haunts me. For years, I kept quiet, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. I signed documents that promised my silence, accepted money that was supposed to buy my forgetting, and tried to move on with my life. But some things you can't unsee. Some truths you can't keep buried forever, no matter how much you're paid to. What I witnessed behind closed doors that night wasn't just shocking. It shattered everything I thought I knew about power, celebrity, and the cost of complicity. Today, I'm breaking that silence. Not because I'm brave, but because staying quiet has become unbearable. And what still haunts me the most isn't just what I saw, it's what I did nothing about. Before that night, I was drowning. Not literally, but close enough. I was 28 years old, living paycheck to paycheck in a city that didn't care if I made it or not. I had the degree, I had the ambition, but I didn't have the connections. I didn't have the lucky break. Every door I knocked on felt locked. Every opportunity that seemed within reach slipped through my fingers. I was exhausted from hustling, from networking, from pretending to be confident when I felt like a failure. And then, out of nowhere, someone reached out. It started with a DM on Instagram from an account I didn't recognize. Professional, vague. We're looking for someone discreet and trustworthy for a high-profile event. Interested? My first instinct was to ignore it. Probably a scam, probably nothing. But something made me respond. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was fate. Either way, I answered. The conversation escalated quickly. They wanted to meet in person. They said they'd heard about me from someone. They wouldn't say who. That should have been my first red flag. But instead of backing away, I leaned in. Within a week, I was sitting across from a man in an expensive suit at a coffee shop, and he was offering me more money than I'd made in 6 months just to attend an event, just to be present and observant, just to sign some paperwork and keep my mouth shut. The money was life-changing, not just good, life-changing. Enough to pay off my debts, enough to move to a better apartment, enough to finally breathe. I asked what the catch was. He smiled and said there wasn't one. Just discretion. Just a simple confidentiality agreement. Nothing unusual for someone in his world, he said. And because I was desperate, because I was tired of struggling, I didn't push back. I didn't ask the questions I should have asked. The documents were thick. I didn't read them all. I was too eager to sign. I caught phrases like non-disclosure, legal consequences, binding agreement. But I glossed over the specifics. What I should have done was get a lawyer. What I should have done was run. Instead, I signed my name at the bottom of pages I didn't fully understand, and I accepted a check that made my hands shake. The next 2 weeks were surreal. I went about my normal life, but everything felt different. I had the money now. I had deposited it immediately, watching the balance in my account grow with a mixture of relief and guilt. Relief because I could finally breathe. Guilt because I hadn't earned it. The man had given me an address and a date. He'd told me what to wear. Dark, professional, nondescript. He'd told me to arrive at 8 p.m. and to expect the unexpected. I tried not to overthink it. I told myself it was probably just a private party for rich people. Maybe I was supposed to serve drinks or manage the guest list. Maybe I was security. The vagueness should have terrified me, but instead, it excited me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was on the inside of something important, like I mattered. like I was part of a world that most people would never see. The night before the event, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the home address, mentally preparing myself. I told my roommate I had a work thing, something confidential. They didn't ask questions. No one knew where I was really going. No one knew what I'd signed up for. That should have been another warning, but I was too far gone by then. I was already invested in the narrative I'd created. The story of the mysterious opportunity, the lucky break, the golden ticket. I arrived at the venue early. It was a mansion, sprawling and immaculate, hidden behind gates and private security. The kind of place that cost more than I'd ever make in my lifetime. Guards checked my name against a list. They scanned me. They took my phone. I'd been told they would. Everything was controlled. Everything was watched. I should have felt unsafe. Instead, I felt like I was finally somewhere that mattered. The man from the coffee shop was waiting inside. He greeted me with a handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He walked me through the ground floor, explaining my role. I was to be available. I was to observe and remember, but never to speak. I was to blend in, stay alert, and most importantly, forget everything I saw by the time I left. He said it casually, like it was the most normal instruction in the world. Other staff members were already there. Servers, security, people I assumed were coordinators. Everyone moved with purpose, with the kind of efficiency that comes from doing this before. No one made eye contact. No one asked questions. It was like we were all actors in a play. Each of us assigned a role. Each of us pretending not to see the bigger picture. The guests started arriving around 9. I caught glimpses through doorways and windows. Celebrities, producers, people whose faces I recognized from magazines and red carpets. The energy shifted the moment they entered. The mansion came alive in a way that was both intoxicating and unsettling. Music started playing from somewhere upstairs. The smell of expensive cologne and perfume filled the air. Everything was beautiful. Everything was wrong. And then I saw him. Diddy himself. He moved through the crowd like he owned the world because, in a sense, he did. He was charming, magnetic, the kind of person who could make you feel seen and terrified at the same time. He made eye contact with me for just a second. And in that moment, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. I'd signed up for something I didn't understand. I'd walked into a world I wasn't equipped to handle, but it was too late to leave. The night was only just beginning. The party was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. From the ground floor, it seemed almost normal. Upscale, exclusive, but manageable. Servers circulated with champagne. Music played at a volume that allowed conversation. The guests mingled, laughed, told stories about their latest projects and conquests. On the surface, it was a celebration. But the deeper I moved into the mansion, the more I realized the surface was a lie. I was assigned to circulate, to be present. That meant I could move through the rooms, observe, but never speak unless spoken to. It was the perfect vantage point to see everything, and what I saw started to disturb me immediately. The guests weren't all there by choice. I could tell by their eyes. Some of them, the younger ones especially, had that hollow look. They smiled when they were supposed to smile, laughed at the right moments, but there was nothing behind it. It was like watching puppets perform a script. Their eyes were dead. That was the first real warning, and I should have listened to it. I watched as staff members I didn't recognize would approach certain guests and whisper something in their ears. Then those guests would disappear. They'd be led toward hallways I'd been told were off limits. The doors would close behind them. Minutes would pass. Then they'd return, looking even more disconnected than before. No one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they did and they just didn't care. The air in the mansion felt heavy. It wasn't just the weight of secrets. It was something tangible, something suffocating. The expensive perfume couldn't mask it. The upbeat music couldn't drown it out. There was something wrong happening in this house, and I was standing in the middle of it, pretending not to see. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking. Rich people were eccentric. Exclusive parties operated by different rules. Maybe this was normal for their world. Maybe I was just naive. But my gut was screaming at me. Every instinct I had was telling me to find the nearest exit and run. Around midnight, things escalated. The atmosphere changed. The music got louder. The lighting shifted to something more intimate, more sensual. More people disappeared into the restricted areas. I noticed that Diddy was orchestrating it all, making phone calls, gesturing to staff, deciding who went where and when. He moved through the mansion like a conductor, and everyone else was an instrument in his orchestra. That's when I saw her. A girl who couldn't have been more than 20, maybe younger. She was trying to blend in, but she looked terrified. I watched as someone approached her. I didn't catch their face, and handed her a drink. She took it hesitantly. Within minutes, her eyes started to glaze over. Whatever was in that drink, it wasn't just alcohol. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't a party. This was something else entirely. This was predatory. This was wrong in a way that went beyond eccentric or exclusive. This was evil. I wanted to do something. I wanted to walk over to that girl and ask if she was okay. I wanted to tell her to get out. I wanted to call someone, the police, her family, anyone. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, watching it happen. And that inaction would haunt me for years to come. The girl was led away by two men I recognized from the entrance. They didn't ask if she wanted to go. They didn't wait for consent. They simply took her arm and guided her toward the hallway. She didn't resist. She couldn't. Not in the state she was in. And everyone around us pretended not to see it happening. I felt sick, physically sick. My stomach was turning, my hands were shaking, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom before I threw up. I locked myself in a stall and tried to breathe. I tried to convince myself that I'd misread the situation. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, but I couldn't. I knew what I'd witnessed, and I knew it was happening in this house, right now, with my silence as permission. When I came out of the bathroom, I made a decision. I was going to leave. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about the documents I'd signed. I was going to walk out of this mansion and call someone, anyone who could help. I was going to do the right thing. But before I could move, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was one of the security guards. He leaned in close and whispered, "You look uncomfortable. Everything okay?" His tone was casual, but his grip on my shoulder was firm. His eyes were cold. He was testing me, checking to see if I was going to be a problem. I forced a smile. Just needed some air. I'm fine. He held my gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. Good, because we wouldn't want you getting any strange ideas. You understand? He squeezed my shoulder just a little bit harder. And then he let go. I understood. The message was clear. I was trapped. I was complicit now. The moment I'd walked through that door, the moment I'd signed those documents, I'd become part of this. And if I tried to leave, if I tried to talk, there would be consequences. The rest of the night was a blur. I stayed where I was told to stay. I didn't try to leave. I didn't try to help anyone. I became a ghost in that mansion, present but invisible, aware but silent. I watched as more people disappeared into restricted areas. I watched as the chaos upstairs grew louder and more intense. I watched as the line between a party and something much darker completely dissolved. By the time the night ended, I wasn't the same person who'd arrived. The innocence I'd clung to, the belief that the world was fundamentally good, that people with power used it responsibly, was shattered. I'd seen behind the curtain. I'd witnessed the machinery of exploitation, and I'd done nothing. As the guests began to leave and the staff started cleaning up, I stood in the corner of that mansion and realized something terrifying. I was part of this now. Not by choice, not because I wanted to be, but because I'd seen what I'd seen, and I'd stayed silent. And staying silent made me complicit. The man from the coffee shop found me before I left. He handed me another envelope. More money as a bonus. "You did well tonight," he said. "You kept your eyes open and your mouth shut. That's exactly what we needed." I took the envelope without a word. And in that moment, I knew. The haunting had already begun. The envelope they gave me contained $15,000. $15,000 for one night of silence? I stared at it in my apartment the next morning, unable to process what I was holding. It wasn't just money anymore. It was blood money. It was the price of my complicity. It was the weight of everything I'd witnessed and chosen not to report. I didn't spend it immediately. I couldn't. It sat in my bank account like a digital scar, a constant reminder of what I'd done. But I also didn't withdraw it, because as much as I wanted to reject it, as much as I wanted to believe I was above its corrupting influence, I knew the truth. I was going to keep it. And that realization made me hate myself. 3 days after the event, I received a message. The same number that had originally contacted me. "We're impressed with your discretion. We have another opportunity if you're interested. Same terms. Double the pay." Double the pay meant $30,000 for one night. It meant I could pay off my car. It meant I could finally move into a nicer apartment without worrying about making rent. It meant I could breathe easier. And it meant I would be complicit in whatever happened at the next event. I told myself I wouldn't do it. I told myself I'd learned my lesson. I told myself I couldn't live with myself if I participated again. But my bank account was empty. My debt was waiting. My future was uncertain, and $30,000 could change that. I accepted the offer. Over the next 6 months, I attended 7 more events. 7 more nights of witnessing exploitation, coercion, and abuse. 7 more nights of staying silent. 7 more envelopes of blood money. By the end, I'd earned nearly $200,000. I was financially stable in a way I'd never been before. I had savings, I had security, I had a future mapped out. And I'd built all of it on a foundation of moral bankruptcy. Each event was similar in structure, but varied in its horrors. The first one was the worst because it was new, because I didn't know what to expect, because my conscience was still screaming at me. But by the 3rd or 4th event, something shifted. The guilt became background noise. The ethical crisis became routine. I developed a coping mechanism. I stopped thinking about what was happening. I stopped trying to rationalize it. I simply existed in the space between knowing and not knowing, complicit and innocent, awake and asleep. The other staff members never talked about it. We existed in a bubble of enforced silence, but I could see it in their eyes. The same hollowness I'd seen in the guests. We were all trapped. We were all being paid to forget. And we were all slowly losing ourselves in the process. What disturbed me most wasn't just what I witnessed at the events themselves. It was what I discovered afterward. I started noticing things. Small details that didn't add up. Financial transfers that seemed too large, too frequent, too organized to be random. People associated with the events who later appeared in news articles about assault or disappearance. A pattern emerging that suggested this wasn't just about exploitation at parties. It was about a larger operation, a network. I became obsessed with understanding the infrastructure. I started asking careful questions to other staff members, never directly, always casually. I pieced together fragments of information. There were people involved in law enforcement. There were politicians. There were producers and executives who wielded enormous power. The events weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic operation designed to compromise, control, and exploit vulnerable people. And I was helping it happen. One night, about 4 months into this arrangement, I was at an event when I saw something that broke through my psychological walls. A girl, she couldn't have been more than 17, was being prepared for something. I watched as handlers, because that's what they were, handlers, gave her pills, dressed her in clothes that weren't hers, and briefed her on how to behave. Be compliant, they told her. Don't cause problems, and you'll be fine. She was terrified. She was crying, and no one was doing anything to help her. I found myself walking toward her. I don't know what I was gonna do. Maybe talk to her? Maybe help her escape? Maybe just acknowledge that I saw her humanity. But before I could reach her, I felt that same security guard's hand on my shoulder. The one who'd confronted me at the first event. Don't, he said quietly. You're doing so well. Don't ruin this. Those 3 words crystallized everything for me. I wasn't doing well. I was becoming a monster. And the money was the leash that kept me compliant. After that night, I started trying to gather evidence. Not to turn it over to authorities, I was too scared for that, but to document what I was seeing. I took notes. I memorized details. I tried to find patterns. I told myself I was preparing to do the right thing eventually. But really, I was just documenting my own crimes. The money kept coming, more events, more opportunities. The offers increased $40,000 per event, then $50,000. They were paying me more because I was valuable, because I was reliable, because I had proven that my silence could be bought. What I didn't realize was that I was being tested the entire time, that each event, each compromise, each moral line I crossed was part of a larger evaluation. They were seeing how far I would go, how much I could be corrupted, how far I could be pushed before I broke. And the answer, it turned out, was very far. One night, at what would be the 7th and final event I attended, someone pulled me aside, a woman I'd never seen before. She was elegant, powerful, and terrifying in a way that made the security guards look like children. "You've done remarkable work," she said. "Your discretion, your reliability, your flexibility have not gone unnoticed. We'd like to offer you a permanent position, a real job, oversight of our operations, management of staff, coordination of events. It was an offer to fully step into the darkness, to stop being a witness and become an architect of exploitation, to accept the full weight of what I'd been participating in and to actively perpetuate it. I should have said no. I should have run. But I looked at my bank account, at the security I'd built, at the life I'd created with blood money, and I realized something horrifying. I'd already said yes. The moment I'd accepted that first envelope, I'd made this choice. Everything that followed was just me walking deeper into the consequences. I told her I needed time to think about it. She smiled and said, I had 48 hours. That night, for the first time since the first event, I couldn't sleep. And I knew that whatever I decided in the next 2 days would define the rest of my life. I didn't sleep for 36 hours. I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop, my phone, my bank account, trying to figure out how I'd gotten here. How a person goes from drowning in debt to being offered a position in a criminal enterprise. How desperation transforms into complicity. How you stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstance and start seeing yourself as a predator. I considered calling the police. I had evidence, notes, details, names. I could walk into a precinct and tell them everything. But then I thought about the security guard's hand on my shoulder. I thought about the people in law enforcement I'd seen at those events. I thought about how deep this network ran. And I realized that going to the police wouldn't save anyone. It would just get me killed. So instead, I did something worse. I called the woman back. I'll do it, I told her. I'll take the position. The words came out of my mouth, and I felt something inside me die. Not metaphorically, not dramatically, but actually die. The part of me that was still human, still capable of redemption, still held onto the belief that I could fix this. That part simply ceased to exist. She sounded pleased. Excellent. We'll be in touch with the details. Welcome to the family. Family. That's what she called it. Like we were bound together by blood and loyalty rather than by crimes and complicity. Maybe that's what we were. Maybe once you crossed a certain line, there was no going back. Maybe the only way to survive was to keep going deeper. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. I was given access to files. Actual files, not just fragmented pieces of information. I saw the full scope of the operation for the first time, and it was far worse than I'd imagined. This wasn't just about parties. It was about a sophisticated system of exploitation that had been running for decades. It involved hundreds of people. It stretched across multiple cities, multiple countries. It had tentacles in government, law enforcement, entertainment, finance, everywhere. And I was now officially part of it. My first assignment was to manage the logistics for an upcoming event. I had to coordinate with handlers, arrange transportation for the guests, oversee security, ensure discretion. I was no longer an observer. I was an administrator of a BU. I was making it happen. I did my job well, too well, because I was good at compartmentalizing. I was good at not thinking about what these logistics meant for the people involved. I reduced everything to spreadsheets and timelines and checkboxes. Guest A arrives at 9 p.m. Guest B transported at 9:30 p.m. Event begins at 10 p.m. I turned human suffering into data points. But then something unexpected happened. Something that broke through my carefully constructed walls of denial. One of the girls at an event recognized me, not from the party, from before. She'd been a student at my college. We'd had a class together maybe 4 years ago. She was bright, ambitious, full of potential. And now she was here, being prepared for the event with the same hollowed out eyes I'd seen in so many others. When she saw me, something flickered in her expression. Recognition. Hope. Like maybe, just maybe, I could help her. Like maybe I was still the person I used to be. I looked away. I pretended I didn't see her. I went back to my clipboard and my logistics and my careful avoidance of eye contact. But she found me later that night. She cornered me in a hallway and grabbed my arm. "You know me," she said desperately. "You know who I am. You know this is wrong. Please help me get out of here." And for a moment, just a moment, I considered it. I considered saying yes. I considered helping her escape. I considered burning the whole thing down and facing the consequences. Then I thought about the money. I thought about my apartment, my savings, my security. I thought about how much I had to lose. I thought about the fact that even if I helped her, there were hundreds of others, that I couldn't save everyone, that trying to save anyone would destroy me. So I did the most horrible thing I've ever done in my life. I called the handlers. "We have a problem," I told them. "One of the guests is becoming unstable." They removed her within minutes. I don't know where they took her. I don't know what happened to her. And I've spent every day since trying not to imagine it. That night, something shifted inside me. I'd crossed a line I didn't know existed. I'd actively participated in someone's destruction. I hadn't just witnessed it or enabled it, I'd orchestrated it. The blood on my hands wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. I started drinking after that, not heavily, not visibly, but constantly. Just enough to dull the screaming in my head. Just enough to make the guilt manageable. Just enough to function. About a week later, I was called to a private meeting with the woman who'd hired me. We sat in an office that was decorated with tasteful art and expensive furniture. She poured herself a drink and looked at me carefully. "You're struggling," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm fine," I lied. "No, you're not. I can see it in your eyes. You're having doubts. You're thinking about running. You're wondering if you could go to the authorities." She took a sip of her drink. "Let me be clear about something. You can't. We own you now. We have records of every event you attended. We have photos, we have video, we have documentation of your participation. The moment you try to betray us, all of that goes to the police. You'll go to prison for the rest of your life. You'll be labeled a predator. Your family will never forgive you. Your life, as you know it, is over." I felt my stomach drop. I'd known, on some level, that they had leverage, but hearing it stated so clearly, so calmly, made it real. "But," she continued, "if you stay, if you keep doing your job, if you remain loyal, then you're protected. You're part of something powerful. You're untouchable." She was offering me a choice that wasn't really a choice. Stay and live in complicity. Leave and be destroyed. Those were my only options. I chose to stay. Walking out of that office, I realized something that would haunt me forever. I had become exactly what I feared. I was no longer a victim of circumstance. I was a perpetrator. I was a monster. And the worst part was that I had done it willingly, eyes wide open for money and security. That realization should have broken me. It should have pushed me to do something heroic, something that would redeem the irredeemable. But instead, it just made me numb. I went back to work. I coordinated more events. I managed more logistics. I helped facilitate more exploitation. And with each event, another piece of my humanity slipped away. Until one day, something happened that I couldn't ignore. Something that made me finally understand what I'd become and what I had to do about it. 6 months into my role as an administrator, I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. The person staring back at me was hollow, efficient, complicit, a ghost wearing my face. I'd coordinated 17 events in that time. 17 nights where I'd managed the machinery of exploitation with spreadsheets and checklists. 17 times I'd ignored the screams I could sometimes hear from the upper floors. 17 times I'd made myself believe that what I was doing was necessary, survivable, forgivable. It wasn't forgivable, and deep down, I knew it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the office. We had a real office now, in a high-rise downtown, completely legitimate on the surface, reviewing logistics for an upcoming event. Nothing unusual. Just another night. Just another opportunity to compromise what was left of my soul. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this my name? A woman's voice. Calm, measured, official. Who is this? I asked, already feeling my heart rate accelerate. This is Special Agent Sarah Chin with the FBI. We'd like to talk to you about your involvement with Sean Combs and his associates. We have reason to believe you possess information relevant to an ongoing federal investigation. The room started spinning. The FBI. They knew. They had an investigation. They wanted to talk to me. In that moment, I had a choice. A real one. I could hang up and call the woman who'd hired me and tell her everything. I could run. I could try to disappear. Or I could listen to what the FBI had to say. I can't talk to you, I whispered. They'll know. They won't know, Agent Chin said firmly. But we need to meet. Tonight. Alone. No one can know. If you don't cooperate, we're going to move forward with the investigation using the evidence we already have. And you will go to prison as an active participant in a criminal conspiracy for a very long time. Another choice that wasn't really a choice. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop across town at 9 p.m. I told my supervisor I was sick and needed to go home. I left the office with my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my keys. The next 5 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in my apartment staring at the walls, thinking about everything. About the money, about the security I'd built, about the girl from my college, about the hundreds of people whose lives had been destroyed while I managed the spreadsheets, about the fact that I'd become so comfortable with the machinery of evil that I'd almost forgotten what good looked like. And I realized something. I was tired. Not just physically tired, but spiritually exhausted. I was tired of carrying the weight of what I'd done. I was tired of the guilt. I was tired of pretending to be human while committing inhuman acts. I was tired of being trapped. Maybe going to the FBI was a way out. Maybe it was the only way out. At 8:45 p.m., I left my apartment. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived. Agent Chen was waiting in a back booth, casual, clothes. Nothing that screamed federal agent. She looked kind, which terrified me. Kindness was a weapon I wasn't prepared for. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly as I sat down across from her. "I know this is difficult." Difficult? That was an understatement. This was the moment where everything changed. This was the moment where I either became a witness or remained a perpetrator. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "The truth," she said. We have the outline. We have financial records, partially. We have some witness statements from people who've escaped the operation. But we need someone on the inside. Someone who knows the scope, the players, the infrastructure. Someone who can help us bring down the entire network. I stared at her. If I do this, I'm going to prison. Probably, she admitted. But you'll have leverage. You'll have cooperated with a federal investigation. You'll have helped protect hundreds of potential victims. The judge will take that into consideration. You might get immunity. You might get a reduced sentence, but yes, there will likely be consequences. I thought about the apartment I'd rented, the car I'd bought, the security I'd built on a foundation of blood money. I thought about losing it all. But then I thought about the girl from my college. I thought about her face when she'd recognized me. I thought about the look in her eyes when I'd betrayed her. And I realized that I was already paying a price that was far higher than any prison sentence. Okay, I said, I'll help you. Agent Chen nodded slowly. This is going to be dangerous. Once you start cooperating, once we move forward, there's no going back. They will find out eventually. And when they do, I'll probably be dead. I finished. Yes, she said, quietly. Probably. I sat with that for a moment. The reality of what I was committing to. Not just cooperation, not just betrayal, but almost certainly death. The woman who'd hired me had made it clear that betrayal had only one consequence, but at least my death would mean something. At least it would help stop the machinery I'd set in motion. What do I need to do? I asked. First, we're going to wire you. You're going to go back to work tomorrow like nothing happened. You're going to continue coordinating events, but you're going to record everything, conversations, meetings, financial discussions. We need evidence, real evidence, the kind that will hold up in court. Over the next hour, Agent Chen explained the operation in detail. They'd been investigating for 3 years. They had multiple jurisdictions involved. They were close to moving on charges, but they needed more evidence. They needed names, dates, amounts, locations. They needed proof of the full extent of the conspiracy. And I could give them all of it. When I left the coffee shop, I was wearing a wire underneath my shirt. My phone had been modified to record and transmit audio. My entire apartment had been bugged. Every moment of my life was now being monitored and recorded. I was terrified. I was also, strangely, relieved. When I got home that night, I looked in the mirror again. The ghost was still there. The hollow eyes were still staring back at me. But now there was something else. A tiny spark of something that might have been redemption. It might have been self-preservation. It might have been just the beginning of the end. I didn't know which. But I knew that I'd finally made a choice that was entirely my own. Whatever happened next, whether I lived or died, whether I went to prison or walked free, I'd chosen to stop being part of the machine. And that choice would set everything in motion. The wire lasted 43 days before they discovered it. I was at an event when a security guard pulled me aside and led me to a soundproofed room. The woman who'd hired me was waiting. "You've been wearing a wire," she said calmly. "Meeting with federal agents. Trying to destroy us." She offered me a choice: death or become her mole inside the FBI. Before I could answer, federal agents breached the walls. Gunfire erupted. The woman was tackled. The security guard was shot. It was over in seconds. What I later learned was that Agent Chen had suspected a mole in the FBI. She'd been running a parallel investigation. When my wire went silent for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, the time it took them to discover it, she knew it was time to move. They'd been listening to everything. They had her confession. They had enough evidence to move forward with arrests across multiple jurisdictions. 7 years have passed. I spent 2 years in prison. I testified at multiple trials. I provided evidence that led to 47 arrests. I helped dismantle a significant portion of the operation, but the haunting never stopped. Here's what no one tells you about complicity. It doesn't disappear just because you've been punished. It doesn't fade because you've testified. It becomes part of you. It whispers to you at 3 a.m. I think about the girl from my college constantly. I've searched for her online 1,000 times. I don't know if she's alive or dead. I don't know if she escaped or if she's still trapped. That uncertainty is its own kind of torture. I think about all the people I enabled by staying silent. There were more than 100 victims identified in the investigation. More than 100 lives destroyed while I managed spreadsheets. My complicity mattered. It caused real harm. And I can't undo it. The money I earned was seized as proceeds of crime. I had to pay restitution. I had to start over from nothing. But I don't regret losing it. That money was poison. What still haunts me is who I became. I look back at the person I was before that first event, and I'm terrified of how quickly I transformed, how easily I rationalized, how naturally I slipped into complicity. I was desperate. I was vulnerable. I was prey to predators who knew exactly how to manipulate me. And all of that is true. But it's also true that I made choices. Every single day I woke up and chose to participate. I chose the money over my conscience. I chose security over integrity. I chose to look away while people suffered. Those were my choices, my responsibility. The operation continued for another 2 years after the arrests. They had people everywhere, in law enforcement, in politics, and entertainment. It took a massive federal task force to finally shut it down completely. But here's the part that still haunts me most. If I hadn't been caught, I would have continued. I would have spent the rest of my life as an administrator of exploitation. I would have never found the courage to do the right thing on my own. I was only forced into redemption by circumstances beyond my control. That tells me something terrifying about human nature. It tells me that ordinary people like me, people like you, are capable of becoming monsters. Not because we're inherently evil, but because we're good at rationalizing. We're good at justifying. We're good at compartmentalizing. Once you start down that path, it's almost impossible to stop on your own. So when people ask me what the most shocking thing I saw at those events was, I tell them the truth. It wasn't the abuse. It wasn't the corruption. It wasn't the way power was weaponized. The most shocking thing was how easy it was to become complicit. How quickly I transformed from a victim of circumstance into a perpetrator of cruelty. How little it took to erase my conscience. And that's what still haunts me. Not the events themselves, but the person I became. The ease of my own corruption. The speed of my moral descent. I know now that the line between good and evil isn't as clear as we want to believe. It's not a chasm. It's a slope. And once you start sliding, you slide a lot faster than you'd ever think possible. That's the real haunting. That's what wakes me up at night. That's what will follow me for the rest of my life.